There's no place that we got to start today's podcast off with other than your Pittsburgh Steelers.
Oh boy,
A
yes.
team that won 10 games last year, which, by the way, was one of the few teams in the NFL this year that I correctly predicted their win loss record in the regular season 10-7. So the last time we talked was actually discussions about whether Matt Canada was the right fit at OC a year prior. And obviously, he was fired midway through last season. They made the change. Kenny Pickett gets hurt. Mitch Trubisky has a couple games. Mason Rudolph takes over, wins the last couple games, gets the Steelers to the playoffs. But this offseason, to me, Gabe, is one very interesting one of what you guys are going to do at the quarterback position because even though you won 10 games last year, you can make the argument that, if Joe Burrow did not go down for Cincinnati, maybe those 10 wins become nine and maybe Pittsburgh doesn't get into the postseason. And so I'm very interested to see what Mike Tomlin and crew do with that quarterback position because you can't go into the offseason behind Lamar, Burrow, and a healthy Deshaun Watson in Cleveland.
Yeah, no, you can't. And there's obviously a lot of concerns about Kenny Pickett and how his glaring lack of development in these first couple years in the NFL. Granted, there has been struggles, but a lot of the pre-draft scouting things that you read about Kenny Pickett are still there. The struggle to look over the middle of the field sometimes is definitely one of the biggest problems, and I think that hurt George Pickens's um, output this year. Even though he was 1,000-yard receiver, I still think it could have been a little bit more. Same with Deontay Johnson, um, and he is used to having a more elite offensive line due to being in college for so long. I think, and that led to him taking a pretty decent amount of sacks too. So I do think the struggles are there with Pickett. I do think the concerns are there. Um, Omar Khan recently came out, said he still has full faith in Pickett, which, whether that's smoke and mirrors, who knows? Because we've also heard that they're on the short list for Justin Fields. We've also heard them in conversations with Russell Wilson. At one point, Tannehill was brought up because you bring in Arthur
The
Smith as the
Arthur
offensive
Smith connection,
coordinator.
yeah.
Yeah, and so I think there's a lot of questions. There's a lot up in the air right now. If I were a betting man, I would think it's going to be Russell Wilson.
Really,
Uh,
you
and,
do? Because
yeah,
I keep hearing from Pittsburgh beat reporters in the area. They have kept saying that it's going to be a quarterback competition between Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph, and they're not going to go after a quarterback. I don't think you can do that, but that's what I keep hearing out of Pittsburgh's camp, at least.
yeah, I don't think that you could do that either. I honestly think, Brandon, that Rudolph is going to want a fresh start somewhere. I think he could go elsewhere to one of those teams that might need a quarterback. I can't think of really any off the top of my head right now. I mean, you think of Tampa Bay if Baker doesn't resign,
Yeah,
he
I
becomes
mean the
available.
only other place that I think, if you're talking about Rudolph, I think he's a backup somewhere. Maybe he could back up somebody, one of the star name quarterbacks. But I was saying this, about Russell Wilson in relation to Justin Fields too. I think Justin Fields is not going to end up in Pittsburgh. I think he's going to end up in Atlanta
I
personally.
agree. Yep.
And so I look at Russell Wilson and I see him a lot like Cam Newton, right? Very famous guy, big personality, almost too big of a guy to be a backup. And I look at it and I go, okay, if he's not a Pittsburgh Steeler, there is a real possibility to me he is not on an NFL roster to at least start next year because I don't think he can be a backup. I think that his brand has taken a massive hit since he went from Seattle to Denver, which, let's be honest, the Nathaniel Hackett thing was a disaster. And Sean Payton, I thought, would fix him to a certain extent. It was exactly what I kind of thought. He'd be better. He wouldn't be perfect. Um, but I don't know outside of Pittsburgh where he fits.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you started to see some of the issues that were with first year in Denver, Russell Wilson start to fix themselves the more time Sean Payton got with him. And then eventually he started playing too well. And they said, well, we're going to sit you the rest of the year. because we don't want to have to be on the hook for all this money to pay you next year.
Well, I don't even think he was playing well. I think it was just the fact that they had a run game and they played good defense and he was able to manage the game. When was the last time he threw for 200 yards in a game last year?
Yeah, I don't even know.
Which is why I do think Pittsburgh's an interesting fit. My worry is big personality and, not taking any shots at Pickens or Deontay Johnson, but both can be diva type receivers. And, Mike Tomlin is such a hard nosed, run the ball, play defense, win the game within the game type of coach. I don't know if that personality meshes with, Russ, go Steelers type.
I do think things change with Arthur Smith. This is the first outside hire that the Steelers have made in God knows how long. I think the last outside hire was when they made
Todd Haley, maybe.
Brian Flores their linebackers coach. If you want to talk
Okay.
just holistically across the whole coaching staff, but yeah, I definitely think that Wilson he would be a much better option than what they've got now. I mean, what Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, Trubisky's gone, so those are the only two quarterbacks that are on the roster right now. Russell Wilson's a far and away better option than either Pickett or Rudolph right now. Obviously, Fields is a far and away better option than Pickett or Rudolph right now. I think amongst the fan base, there's just a severe lack of belief in the two guys that are in there right now, especially with Pickett, because this was a first round pick. This is a guy that was supposed to kind of step in and be the franchise guy from day one. And that just wasn't the case because you drafted him at his ceiling, I think. There's no development there, and I don't know that it's coming anytime soon.
What has the sentiment been about fans about, former quarterback Ben Roethlisberger seemingly taking shots at Tomlin and the coaching staff about the development of the offense? It seems.
I think it's well-founded criticism from Ben. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, there were glaring issues with that offense, especially under Canada. And the reluctance from Mike Tomlin to recognize his mistake and make the change, it frustrated a lot of the fan base, and it clearly frustrated Ben Roethlisberger too.
So, what are your thoughts about the other teams in the division, whether it be Cleveland, Cincinnati, Baltimore? Obviously, Baltimore and Cleveland made the playoffs last year, and I contend, by the way, even though obviously I'm, from the Cleveland area, I don't think the Browns would have made the playoffs if Cincinnati and Burrow were healthy. I think Burrow and Cincinnati were just starting to catch their stride, and then obviously the Burrow injury happened on that Thursday night. Like, I look at Cincinnati, and I know Baltimore had a really good year last year. I thought last year had to be their year. I think Cincinnati is the only team that I look in the AFC that I can say, yes, they can probably go take down Kansas City. Um, I think as long as you have Joe Burrow, as long as you have Jamar Chase, as long as you have T. Higgins, you're gonna be in the mix. Um, I just think, the Steelers are so well coached. They're gonna win games. Mike Tomlin's probably not gonna have a losing record, but I don't know what to make about Deshaun Watson in Cleveland. I don't know what to think about Baltimore. Are they gonna have a regression a little bit from him? Such a good year last year. I think the division's fascinating. It's the only division in the NFL that had all four teams a winning record.
Yeah, I think kind of what you mentioned with Cincinnati, that they were kind of starting to catch their stride while prior to the Burrow injury. I think the Browns were the same way. You talk about the Steelers being well coached, but the Browns, I think they're well coached too. With Stefanski.
Yeah, it's funny here in Cleveland. We talk about Stefanski a lot, and I've said Stefanski drives me nuts. His play calling is not great. I think he gets too cute a lot of the times.
I
But
agree totally. Yeah.
you cannot deny, though, and I've said this, and it's the fine line between you want the coach fired and you think he's a great coach at the same time, because he's won 2 Coach of the Years. What he did last year with Joe Flacco, who looked like a freaking bust with the Jets, looked like he was going to be out of the league after a great career in Baltimore, comes to Cleveland, plays very well, obviously, gets that team to the playoffs. But I'm sorry, you invested $230 million in Deshaun Watson. However, the fan base feels about him, that is your franchise guy going forward. Now I think it's about for Cleveland getting weapons to surround him.
Yeah, Watson. I think he started to catch his stride a little bit before he got hurt. That game against Indianapolis, as crazy as it was, I think Watson was pretty good.
Well, no,
And
that was the game he got hurt. The first game
yeah,
of
yeah.
the series. Yeah.
I oh, you're right. Um, I thought the Browns defense turned it around in that game quite a bit. Myles Garrett, that's the game you watched and you were like, oh, this dude's depoy. Like,
By the way, I've always been critical of Garrett. I always thought he was a little bit overrated for what people said. I always defended your guy, TJ Watt. I always thought he impacted the game a lot more than Miles did. But I thought this year, Miles had the best year of his career, especially early in the season. I did think late in the year, he sort of reverted back to the guy who would get his one sack a game late in the game and not really impact the game. That has sort of been my criticism of Garrett, that I don't think Watt does as much, is it just feels like doesn't play the run as much, does not consistently impact the quarterback in key moments in games.
yeah, the last 7 weeks of the season was it that Myles Garrett didn't have a sack?
Yeah.
That was when I kind of thought like, all right, this dude probably isn't going to be the defensive player of the year. I really thought it would be TJ Watt again,
See,
but
I thought it was going to be Deron Bland for the record breaking pick sixes that he had.
yeah, that's an interesting take too. But I think that, and the game, by the way, the game that I was thinking of where Watson kind of caught his stride was Tennessee. That's on me.
Okay. So that was early in the year, and then
Yep.
obviously came back and that Baltimore game where he couldn't hit a pass in the first half, then won the game with a broken shoulder. That's when I thought, he was turning the page, and then obviously the injury happened. But it's very fascinating when you're in a conference in the AFC, and we're gonna get into some draft stuff, but the conference is just so loaded that there are good teams. It's like last year. There's going to be good teams that are not going to make the playoffs.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm interested. You talk about good teams that could miss the playoffs. It was the Jacksonville Jaguars last year. I'm interested to see what sophomore CJ Stroud's going to do next year as well. Now
That's a
that
good
defense.
point. Harder schedule, first place. By the way, I love Anthony Richardson and the Colts. And I think if they get a third place schedule, he gets a full year with Shane Steichen, the OC. I think the Colts could be what the Texans were. Obviously, not as big of a jump, but that could be a team. We see teams, rotate playoffs in and out. We see teams that make the playoffs miss it, teams that miss it get in. I think the Colts are a sneaky team next year.
Yeah, I agree. If Anthony Richardson is kind of, if he can be what he was showing flashes that he could be before he got injured last year, I think the Colts are in a really good spot. I also think the Chargers are going to be an important team to look
Oh,
out.
they're all.
Ball
I
ball.
would bet money right now the Chargers are a playoff team next year,
I totally agree. Yep.
which is fascinating. So you look at what, just take the AFC, forget the NFC, right? So last year's AFC playoff teams were Buffalo, Miami, Baltimore, Cleveland, Kansas City, Jacksonville. I know I'm missing one, so that's six.
You're talking.
Pittsburgh, seven.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was seven. So this year, I would guess Buffalo and Miami are probably going to make it again out of the AFC. I think they're just too good. We know probably the Chargers and Cincinnati are going to be in. My guess is that replaces Pittsburgh and Cleveland. And I think that the AFC South, you probably would have Indy or Jacksonville. My guess is replace Houston. As good as I think the Texans are, I think the division will be better because I don't think Buffalo, Miami, Kansas City, I think Baltimore is going to still be good enough to make the playoffs. So, not to say Browns, Pittsburgh, Houston are going to be good teams, but I think, barring injury, the Chargers were just such a mess, and Cincinnati was so injury riddled mess. Those two are certainly going to be in, and then you're going to have one wild card that nobody sees coming.
Yeah, and it could be the Jets. I'll tell you that.
Really? Because
With Aaron Rodgers
I
coming
don't.
back, staying
I
healthy,
think they're the third best team in their division.
I agree with you. I do, but I think you could see three teams come out of the East.
Because I don't know. I think that their offensive line is so bad. I think that the schedule's harder. I think Aaron coming off the torn Achilles, if he wasn't already mobile, I don't think he's going to be mobile at all. And I just think there's so much turbulence in that room, I think they could be like a 7-8 win team. I don't think in that hard AFC they're a playoff team.
Yeah, I guess we're really gonna. I feel like the discourse around the Jets was they're a quarterback away. They're a quarterback away. So I guess that's what we're gonna see.
Yeah, good point. So now let's dive into the draft a little bit. So we talked about Justin Fields a lot. Obviously, we pretty much everybody thinks he's going to leave Chicago. We do this every year with the draft, right? We always try to take down the number one overall pick. We always try to find a way to discount him. I am laughing at these people. And again, if you have this take, feel free to fight back with me. But these people that are saying Chicago should trade down, get a couple picks, maybe take Marvin Harrison and build around Justin Fields. I'm like, guys, you've seen Justin Fields for 3 years. He has a 60% completion percentage. He's not good as Jordan Love. He's not as good as Jared Goff, and I don't think he's as good as Kirk Cousins, who's been very good in Minnesota over the last few years. There is a transcendent prospect in Caleb Williams, so they're trying to find the minimalist ways to take him down. I think he's just a special talent. I don't care about some of the weird stuff when it's come to how he reacts at the end of games, the medical stuff. Like, I think Caleb just knows how gifted he is. He's trying to find the right home for him, which I do think Chicago would be just, it'd be such a Bears move to trade out of that number one pick and give it to Washington, where Caleb Williams grew up and played high school in the area, and let him be a commander. I would not do it if I'm the Bears and they have Matt Eberflus. I'm not even in love with as a coach, but I'm all in on the kid.
I am too. Yeah, I think and I you touch on how he reacts at the end of games. I agree that I don't think that's really an issue because you're right. He understands how talented he is, and he's a competitor. He wants to win, and when you don't win, the emotions come out. So
By the way, his defense is, I think I saw a stat, his 8 losses in college. I think the least amount of points his defense gave up was 35.
yeah, and that's USC for you. I mean, they're big play defenses for sure. They kind of feast on the turnovers, the points off turnovers. But yeah, I think there's no reason for Chicago to move out of that one slot. You need Caleb Williams, and you also don't know what you're going to fetch for Fields yet, so that could get you draft capital as well.
I mean,
So I don't know
I
if
think,
you're looking to
and
trade
I
him.
said this, if I'm Atlanta, like if I'm Chicago, I had somebody come on and tell me I think they could only get a third or a fourth round pick. And I'm like, at least you're getting a second, if not a first.
It's at
Because
least a
I'm
second.
sorry. I don't think people realize the premium that a quarterback is in this league. There's only 32 of them. And Atlanta is sitting at, what are they, 15, 16, somewhere around there. They're not going to be in position to probably get one of these top quarterbacks, which is why the fit just feels so good. Like, give up a second or your first if you really have to. Go get him. You have the talent, and a weaker division, by the way, in that NFC South, where who knows what Carolina is going to be. I'd like to see Bryce Young one more year with an offensive coach, because I defended him a little bit last year and said I don't think even Patrick Mahomes could survive under what was put out there in Carolina. Tampa I like, but it sounds like Mike Evans may not be back. Sounds like some of those defensive pieces may not be back. Who knows what they're going to be? New Orleans, I think, is a complete mess. With trying to piece together with Derek Carr and their cap situation, and they're sort of that team that's going to be 7 wins, and you know what they're going to be.
Yep.
Um, so I think Atlanta could win the division next year with Fields. I really do. I like Raheem Morris. I like the fact he's coach on both sides of the ball, and I think Atlanta is in a good position.
Yeah, and Atlanta's sitting at 8 in the draft order. So I mean, if you're able to get Fields and you're able to get him an elite weapon too, because you still got Bijan Robinson,
Yep.
and he's a guy that needs to be used. You still got Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Johnny Smith proved that he could be a nice complementary piece to that offense. If you're able to go out and get it and add one of those elite wide receivers, you look at maybe Rome Odunze from Washington. If he does make it to 8, um, oh, I thought I was going to sneeze. If you look at Rome Odunze, who if he possibly falls to 8, that would just be a fantastic weapon for Fields to have in Atlanta. But I think you're going to see three quarterbacks come off the board with the top three picks. You're going to see Williams. You're going to see May. Who does New England go with? That's the
I
question.
think it's Jaden Daniels. And I think it is a culture complete flip from the Belichick era, which I think that they absolutely need to go with. Now this was going to be my question for you. You talk about Drake May. I am not the biggest fan of Drake May. Um, he reminds me a little bit of Will Levis and Mitch Trubisky, who also played in North Carolina. I think he has a big arm, but I don't think he's that accurate. And he has that little bit of showmanship that a Zach Wilson, a Will Levis had. I'm not big on him. I think he could work in Washington potentially, but we know in this draft we're gonna have two quarterbacks that are gonna be superstars historically. We have two that are gonna be okay, and we have two that are gonna bust. And I think that out of all these quarterbacks, Drake May probably has the most bust potential, to be harsh.
I I'm going to disagree with you there.
Okay.
I do think I watched you watch the film on Drake May. You've got a big arm. You've got a mobile guy who can improvise and make plays when his feet aren't necessarily set. There's a clip out there of Drake May, and he's getting swallowed by like two defensive ends at the same time, and it ends in a completion. So he can go out there and he can make plays under pressure. I think the two biggest bust quarterbacks in this draft are going to be the two older guys. It's going to be Nix and it's going to be Penix because
Really?
it's the
Because
same.
I like Bo Nix a lot. Bo Nix reminds me of Justin Herbert.
I think it's the same thing with Pickett. You're drafting these guys at their ceiling. They're 20, 23, 24 already. Same with Jaden Daniels. I mean, he's already up there in age 23. He's going to be 24 by the time the season starts. These guys, you're drafting them at their ceiling. It's going to be really tough to develop them. And I know that Jaden Daniels drew a lot of comparisons to Lamar. Um, I just don't know if that'll translate at the NFL level. And it's not like you're going to draft this guy to be a backup because, like I said, he's going to be 24 when the season starts. He's going to have to be in a starting role right away.
That's a good point. We don't have time to go through, where all these quarterbacks are going to land, et cetera, et cetera. But, I kind of feel like Denver's going to draft a quarterback and move off Russ. I feel like Vegas is obviously going to draft a quarterback. I think New England, we both agree there, is going to draft a quarterback. I don't think they would draft Marvin Harrison. Some people have made the argument that you draft Harrison and give Mac Jones one more year. I don't think you do that. I don't think this quarterback class is going to be. I think it's as good as advertised, and I don't think there's going to be one better than that next year. So if I'm New England, I think you spend money in free agency on weapons and you draft a quarterback. Um, I think Seattle is going to go after a quarterback. I think Michael Penix in Seattle just feels right to me. Obviously, played college in the area. Their roster is ready to win. They just need a guy to come in and sort of be a better version of Geno Smith. Penix reminds me a lot of a bigger, stronger Tua.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, they're both lefties, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Penix has a cannon of an arm and he can spin the thing too, dude. It's the injuries that worry me with Penix.
Yeah, no, agree. Two injuries, obviously. And I don't know. It's fascinating. I think that a lot of these quarterbacks have similar traits. I think it's just going to depend on where they land and who will be successful. JJ McCarthy is a very interesting one because he was in a very run centric system in Michigan, did not throw for a lot of yards, especially when they won the national championship. But he's a bona fide winner. And he's a guy that, to me, like Sean Payton in Denver, that feels like a guy that Sean Payton gets a hold of with the run game in Denver and that coaching. Like JJ McCarthy could be something if he lands in Denver.
Yeah, the thing that's really coming with JJ McCarthy is that people think he's a really elite processor and he's really smart with the football, which he is. I mean, he doesn't turn the ball over. Um, and he makes generally, I think he does make smart decisions with the football. So, maybe Sean Payton could turn him into something, but I do think that there's growing belief that he will go probably in the top half of this draft. McCarthy will.
Do you think, I kind of feel this way that, you know, I think we're going to get 6 quarterbacks, and I think they're all going to be drafted in the first round. I don't think one of these guys slips to the second round.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the teams that probably are going to need quarterbacks. It's Carolina, Washington, New England. You know, the Cardinals, the Chargers, they're not going to draft a quarterback. You know, depending on what happens with Fields in Atlanta, they might need one. Minnesota, Denver, Vegas, Seattle, all those guys need quarterbacks.
Yeah,
Whether the run will go in the first round, and all 6 of those guys who I think half of them aren't first round talents. It whether they might go in the first round. I think you might see it. Yeah.
that's a good point. I do think Arizona, for the record, takes Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yep.
I think at number 4. I think the Chargers are the trade back team. I think that's a team that if a team like Seattle, I don't think they do it with Denver or Vegas because they're in their division. But Seattle to me feels like the team. They move up. I think the Chargers can move back unless they're in love with like Brock Bowers out of Georgia. I could see them making that move. But I think the Chargers need so much help on defense. Let's trade back to a team like Seattle that needs to get their quarterback. They give up maybe their first, an extra third, maybe a second the year after, and the Chargers just accumulate more picks.
I'm eager to see where Quinyon Mitchell goes, Brandon.
Okay.
The cornerback from Toledo. He had a great combine, and he's an electric player. So he's a first round talent for sure.
How much
I just need
stock?
to
What sort of football question for you is how much stock do you put into the combine? Because I said, combine's good for a guy that's maybe a mid-round third guy could boost his stock to the second round. Maybe a fourth round guy boosts his stock to day 2. But watching guys in shorts and t-shirts run around, catching the ball, making throws, and all that, I don't put much stock into it. I want to see what you do on tape.
Yeah, I want to see what you do on tape, and I want to see what you do in pads, more
Yeah.
importantly, because like you said, they're running around in t-shirts and shorts. It's not going to show you anything. I do agree that it's better for the mid-round guys, or maybe like a Xavier Worthy who goes out there, breaks a 40-yard dash record. That might boost him into the first round because these guys value speed so much at the receiver position. And the thing is, Worthy's not even the best receiver on Texas. It's Adonai Mitchell.
Well, the
But
thing is, we've seen this about speed guys before in the NFL. You can have all the speed if you want. If you can't separate from man coverage, you can't play.
yeah, it's John Ross, Kadarius Toney. Those are the 2 names.
John Ross, Kadarius Toney, Anthony Schwartz, the guy the Browns drafted in the third round, very tired of Auburn and couldn't separate at all from man coverage. So I don't care if you can, have 4.2, 4.1 speed, whatever it is. If you can't separate from man coverage, you can't play in the league.
Yep, absolutely.
Like that clip from the Brands World podcast? If so, make sure you go down there and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there hitting the subscribe button, make sure to also hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. And make sure you check out all the other clips from the Brands World podcast right here on YouTube.